So we're going to talk about the digital divide. And some people think that tech can be the panacea for all ills. It can bridge divides of gender and economic disparity. It can bring about equity and inclusion. Others believe that it can only make problems worse. Ted, the first question to you on this panel. It's about India versus Bharat and replications of it around the region. So India, the elite English-speaking urban country, cities versus the vast, less affluent swath of smaller cities and rural areas known by the historic name of Bharat. There's a real business case to be made for more diverse, equitable, and inclusive technology. What do you think stands in the way?
I think, in a word, it would be access. And so we've tried to do something to address those concerns about access. First of all, we partnered with Railtel and Indian Railways with support from Mahindra and provided free Wi-Fi in train stations, more than 400 train stations. And recently I went to one in the Nizamuddin train station, and I learned from a man who'd been downloading videos on the free Wi-Fi how he had grown a new business right next to the train station. And we've done this after doing it in India. We took it to Indonesia and the Philippines, Thailand, Mexico, Nigeria, Brazil, because it works very well, provides access, and that's our mission. And then specific to India, and maybe we can put up a picture of the Internet Sati, but we did some research in 2015, and we found that in rural India, as we just heard a little bit about, one of all the rural users of the internet, only 1 in 10 was a woman. And we thought, well, that's a missed opportunity. That's a gap that we can do something about. So working with Tata Trusts, we created a program called Internet Sati, and that's the pictures you're seeing. And it's train the trainer, it's women training women. And now, at this point, we've had 80,000 women training 28 million women in almost 300 villages, half of India's villages. And it's making a huge difference in the lives of so many. A lot of rural women in India prefer to use video or voice rather than text. And so we've made sure that those videos and those voice instructions are in all of India's 22 official languages, and that the keyboard is available for many more. And it's making a difference. So if a woman wants to ask about a health question or about cervical cancer, we heard about earlier, or she wants to learn about the price of rice or the price of fish, or how to find a particular kind of food or recipe, she can find it. And she has access to the same information that the Prime Minister of India has.
CP, coming to you, how can tech improve access to education, help with financial inclusion and employment? What you have wide and deep experience in, in both urban and rural India, doing business with all kinds of people. Tech Mahindra is in, nearly 100 countries. I just wondered what your thoughts are on how tech can improve access.
I'm very humbled when I heard Chetna ji talked about the rural bank. And it is very, very evident that there are two ways to ever influence a society, which is the push and the pull. Clearly, in my opinion, this battle of rural India wanting to become equivalent to urban India, that battle has already been won because the pull exists. And that pull is, I'm hoping that our Prime Minister has little more information than the rural person, and I don't want him to take decision only on that limited information. But clearly, that pull, when I say the pull exists, is because people have started realizing that internet is an equalizer. that all these apps, they may start with a consumption of a TikTok or a consumption of a YouTube, but they eventually lead to their source of healthcare, their source of education, and their source of financial inclusion. That we have 400 million or 380 million Jan Dhan accounts now. It clearly shows is that there is a financial inclusivity that is happening. Similarly, if you look at Google Pay, and the only reason I'll give you a Google example is because I'm hoping that you will do more business with me. I'm selling Google. Yeah? So, I mean, Google Pay, I mean, these railway stations, now 400 railway stations, I still remember when we were doing the VT in Mumbai, the biggest challenge was that people wanted to watch cricket matches, and some people wanted to watch pornography that Madam Minister said this morning that she had banned it, and some people wanted to watch movies. Now, how do you create a video download speeds without disappointing hundreds of thousands of people on that small, relatively small footprint? So I think what I'm trying to re-emphasize is what starts as an entertainment pretty soon starts becoming shopping, pretty soon starts becoming comparing fares, pretty soon starts becoming about how to get my produce up there. So I think this tool for information, once we provide it in their hands, and now with remote health, remote education, whatever name you call it, you may call it Baiju. But the point is that the more you give that power in their hands, the divide is only reducing.
Ted, next question coming up for you. Before that, our global data team has data showing GDP per capita versus gender gap in mobile ownership. Nirav, if you can please bring up that slide. Yes, there it is. I don't know if you can see what's up there, but at the lower end of the GDP per capita, a woman in India is nearly 27% less likely to own a mobile phone compared with a man. And the gender gap decreases as income levels go up. Ted, where do you think access to technology stands both culturally and economically in India? Earlier, during the summit yesterday, for instance, we heard about Kap panchayats or village clans banning women from using mobile phones. I wonder what the situation is in some of the other cultures that you are familiar with in this region.
Well, first of all, I would echo something a previous speaker said, which is that you don't want poor solutions for poor people. What we've tried to do, we try to build our products for everybody, so that on the left side of that scale, that people have access, even through fairly simple phones, to the best information possible. Now, on the left side of that scale, a lot of times people will have to share phones. And so a family might have one phone, and in some parts of the world, including India, that might mean the husband has first access to the phone, the children second, and the woman third. And so what we have to do then is find ways for women to learn about how they can have privacy and safety on a phone that is shared. And CP talked about democratization of education. I think there's a whole process of teaching people about what is accessible on the internet and how they can protect themselves and retain their privacy. Because that's also something that's not just for wealthy people, but for poor people as well.
CP, for a lot of women online, and this is not only in India but elsewhere in the world as well, going online is a lot like walking in a shady neighborhood sometimes. You know, you're always looking over your shoulder. It's the same thing online. What do you think, how do you think tech can sort of help with that? You know, how can tech find solutions?
I mean, walking in a shady neighborhood should apply to everybody, I assume. And I don't know why you are discriminating, but so
It's much more of a threat to women than men.
I don't know, Saritha. You know, you don't want another conversation on this, but I can only tell you from my perspective is that more often than not, like in any neighborhood, you have good neighbors and you have bad neighbors. I mean, I'm not trying to generalize it for the sake of generalizing it. It is just a way a community gets developed. And clearly, most of us in the technology sector do understand that many times we leave the door open, we invite trouble. We are the ones who would click on everything yes without even bothering to read what it is. We are the ones who will leave our credit card information. We are the ones who are giving data and not exercising the security constraints that we need to exercise. We are the ones who will post pictures and let it go into the public domain. So I think, like for your own community and the way you live in your own houses, I mean, you do some basic cleaning up, you do a basic protection, you do the basic data security, I think you will be all right. And I'm not saying a determined guy from the dark web cannot get access to you, but it will become a lot more difficult. It's the same way in a community, if you lock your doors, you're not inviting the thief. So I'm giving a generic reply, but I can only tell you is that web is no different.
Continuing on the theme of gender balance, in the Silicon Valley, the epicenter of all things digital, it's had a reputation of being pretty male-dominated and even hostile to women. And there's a name for it. It's called bro culture. Ted, how do you build rules where you can strip away the toxic culture and keep the meritocracy in tech?
Well, if your business is innovation, then that means you have to have creativity that comes from all sources. Innovation tends to be the result of collaboration, and collaboration is best when people sitting across the table don't necessarily look alike or don't necessarily have the same perspectives, but can come at a problem from different angles. That's what creates breakthrough. I think the business case is very clear for diversity and inclusion. It's what creates the kind of breakthroughs that lead to innovation, that lead to successful business. Now, it's a challenge, for example, in the engineering field, more than in the government affairs field where I work. So you have to widen the pipeline, and I think that means being very proactive about girls' education, especially in STEM. The business case, we've heard a lot about it earlier. The human case is very real too. I'm a white guy. I've had a lot of privileges in my life, but in the 1980s, when I joined the diplomatic corps, a gay man could never dream of becoming an ambassador. Well, we've been able to break that glass ceiling. I'm very happy that we have. And I think to allow everybody to achieve her or his potential is what allows progress to continue and allows innovation to flourish.
CP, you are part of a 200 billion industry by sales. India's IT services industry employs over 4 million. And despite the gender imbalance, you have about 30% representation by women. This industry in some ways has been a pathbreaker, but you have ways to go. And what can you do and what can other industries learn from you on how to not just break the glass ceiling, but also break through that impenetrable glass door?
Saritha, I wish there was an easy answer to this. So first look at it. I mean, it's not just the gender. A lot depends on the geographies. I mean, you started by giving examples of Kap Panchayat, right? Or from where I grew up in Rajasthan, the rural Rajasthan. So certain geographies, certain cultures, certain histories have discouraged women to get educated. Now, when I went to school, trust me, there was only 2 girls in a batch of 300 people. Today, when I go to hire from the engineering schools, it's about 37, 38, 40%, depending on which geography you're going to. Now, that particular person in IT industry, if we are at 30%, when the intake is at 37, 38%, I think we are doing well. Should we not be equal? I mean, you are right, we should try and be equal. Now, what a company like Tech Mahindra would do is, it is on a CEO's agenda, that he wants to constantly see this percentage being improved. And you analyze it very different ways. For some people, maternity leave is important. For some people, crashes are important. For some people, flexible working hours is important. And you constantly take that feedback and bring that, practices into play. I think it has to become really a national agenda. We had the minister in the morning. She was very happy that today women representation in the parliament is the highest, but that highest is 17%. I mean, it's nowhere close to 50% that it should have been. She was very proud that she, as a woman minister, is making such a huge impact, but she is one of the 3 cabinet ministers. I mean, including the state minister, there are only 8. So my point is, like in Tech Mahindra, it is a CEO agenda to increase the women participation. I think it has to become a national agenda.
Yeah.
Let's get to some of the newer forms of divides. Because of the proliferation of artificial intelligence, there's not just a digital divide, but also an algorithm divide. And Ted, your Google uses AI so extensively. Between the savvier digital users and the newer next billion users coming online, there is a distinct difference. People who are savvy know how to navigate away from controls, protect their privacy. What happens when consumers have less information, they have less experience with traditional media, and what happens to, how can they be made aware of what algorithms can do, and how do you then navigate away from that? How do you educate newer users on that? And you are, one of your biggest initiatives is the Next Billion Users initiative, and these are a whole several millions coming online every year, several hundred millions. I want you to talk about that.
I think you have to start with an ethical framework. And we published ours a little more than a year ago. And we listed 7 principles that we will adhere to with every single AI project. The second on that list is that we will not create or reinforce bias with any of our AI projects. And we evaluate every single project that comes up against those principles. And if it meets the criteria, we go forward. If it doesn't, we don't do the project, or we change the project so that it will adhere to those principles. And good news is that other companies, other countries, even the OECD have now adopted ethical frameworks for the use of AI. But you address a complex problem when it comes to NBU users. And so there has to be a whole process of democratizing education, as CP talked about, where you're educating. In the Internet Sati program, for example, has a safety and privacy portion of it. We're able to make it quite simple on devices to eliminate data if you want to. Now, I live in Singapore. There are a few places I go. I actually like to keep the data on my map so that my maps will remember where I want to go next in case I forget. But you don't have to do that. It's very easy now. You can have automatic deletion of your data as soon as you've looked up a question, it can be deleted. Same with YouTube. And so I think we have to make it as simple as possible for users, whether the next billion or the first billion users, to be able to have power over, to be empowered to decide how their data is used.
Before I go to the next question, I'd love to do a quick show of hands. How many of you skip reading the consent forms and privacy agreements and go straight to the I agree button? Let's have a show of hands.
I do too.
That's pretty much all the room, but I see that some hands are not up, so I am assuming that there are some lawyers in the room. CP, how do you make those who are coming online for the first time become aware of privacy and consent? Because a lot of these users are not even literate. So, forget digitally literate. So how would you tackle a problem like that in, say, very rural India?
So, Saritha, when I grew up, the first hazardous vehicle that I drove was called bicycle. And there was no user manual for the bicycle, and the only way I learned cycling was by breaking my knees. So I can only tell you is that for the first time user, we can put whatever warning signs, we can do whatever to educate them, but the reality is somewhere that old again push and pull, that people around you have to tell you that you're making a mistake, because whatever content we give and how many languages you give that content, the reality is that unless you fall a few times, you won't learn. So I wish there was an easy answer of trying to tell people which part of online you should go to or not. What is a good touch or a bad touch? But the reality is you need to learn on your own.
But if you have a Google account, go to safety.google, and you will find right away that you can figure out exactly what data is being shared and what isn't. And if you have children, as I do, scroll down a little bit and it talks about how you can protect your family, what steps you can take to protect your family. Talk about the most innocent people of all. That's our children. We don't want them to go online and find bad things. And there are many, many steps that parents can take to protect their children.
So one of the effects of the tech industry has been the rise of the gig economy, and from food delivery platforms to cab platforms, all of them use contract workers who are not classified as employees. CP, to you I ask, is the gig economy worsening the digital divide? Does there need to be a check on transparency about who profits from technology and how to share the profits? And it's not about just companies and consumers, but also about the workers, isn't it?
Again, it's a very good question. The reason is that you're dead right. It is almost like a California gold rush. There are no rules and people will go and work there, and whoever can afford the shovels and the jeans will somehow employ people. So a Domino's pizza or a Uber or a Flipkart or a Walmart, on one end has created thousands and thousands of the jobs, and many of them new jobs, which didn't exist, like the delivery guy, the packaging guys, or XYZ. Now, because they come under the guise of shared economy, an Uber driver is considered as an entrepreneur. So he's not taken as a labor by the Ministry of Labor. So the minimum wages will not apply to that person. Now, whether this is right or wrong, I think, again, I believe in empowerment of the individual. That individual should know what the Ministry of Labor laws are. If he chose to become a driver for a Hertz or a Euro car, he would probably make this much of money. If he chooses to work for Uber and the number of hours he puts in, this is what he would do. And personally, I think people can make those decisions. Our job is to provide that information. And sooner or later, regulators in different countries have shown that they start putting a framework even in gig economy. I'm sure India will also create the similar frameworks.
We're nearly out of time. Ted, last question to you. Is regulation the answer? And I know, I pretty much know what you're going to say, but I would love you to answer that question.
Well, that's an easy one, no. It's much more complicated than simply having governments make all of the decisions for us. And I just wanted to add to what CP said. The opportunities are enormous. India has an aspiration for a $5 trillion internet economy within 5 years. That's going to be a lot of jobs. And yes, there will be some change. Before airplanes were invented, there weren't flight attendants, and there weren't ground crews, and there were all kinds of jobs that came about as a result of the aviation industry. With that $5 trillion, there will be a lot of jobs that will be created that we don't even know about now. And it's in Southeast Asia, it's the same thing. And the growth in the internet economy in rural Southeast Asia is twice as fast as that of metropolitan Southeast Asia. So the opportunities are great, and particularly great in Asia.
To some, lots of different newer forms of digital divides showing up. There's a lot of work to do. Ted, CP, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Saritha, and thank you, Ted.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.